welcome to episode 8 of the Warwick Podcastle. This time we've called upon some of our colleagues to talk about their favourite documents in the Greville family of Warwick Castle collection here at Warwickshire County Record Office. First up, we have archivist Hilary taking us back to the very beginning of the Greville family's involvement with Warwick Castle.
How to acquire a castle in Jacobean times, or rather, how did Fulk Greville come to own Warwick Castle? The short answer is by writing a note on a scrap of paper, asking if he could have it, and sending it to the King, James I. This note is contained in the Greville family archives. I find it fascinating and rather astonishing that such a great castle was acquired in this way. Perhaps even more astonishing is the King's response. Thomas Howard, 1st Earl of Suffolk, his Lord Chamberlain, replied on the 14th of May 1604 at the foot of the same note, stating that the King is pleased to grant the castle to Greville. To me, living in the 21st century, it seems rather bizarre. In my mind, Warwick has always been a large, important and dominant castle. Clearly this can't always have been the case. Warwick Castle's guidebook tells us Ethelfleda, daughter of Alfred the Great, was the earliest military strategist to make use of the area's natural defensive features when she constructed a burh in 914. In 1068, William the Conqueror ordered a castle to be built. From this point the castle develops, and by the 14th century is owned by the Beauchamp family. In 1449, their last surviving daughter, Anne, married Richard Neville, also known as Warwick the Kingmaker, which saw Warwick Castle's importance increase. So, how some 150 years later did Greville come to acquire it? In 1499, Edward Plantagenet, the 17th Earl of Warwick, was executed for treason, and the castle became the property of the Crown. Over the next century, ownership passed between the Dudley family and the Crown a number of times. It seems the Tudors were not keen on Warwick Castle. Returning to the document in question helps to shed some light on the fortunes of it in the 16th century. In his note to King James I, Fulk Greville refers to the castle as in a very great decay and ruin, and for many years past hath been used for a common jail, and thereby utterly defaced and made unfit for your Majesty's use. He goes on to say, It may please your Highness, of your gracious favour, to grant unto your said servant, in fee simple, the said castle, together with the garden thereunto belonging, called the Vineyard. If that wasn't audacious enough, his second paragraph goes on to refer to 2 watermills adjacent to the castle walls, and asks if he may also have these, on a lease, and for the usual rent thereof. He concludes his request to say that he shall daily pray for his Majesty's long and most prosperous reign. So, it would seem the way to acquire a castle in Jacobean times was quite straightforward. Pick one that's falling down, and then very cheekily ask the King if you can have it in the most informal of notes, while promising your support to him. From this audacious request, the Greville family owned Warwick Castle for 374 years.
Next, we're jumping forward to the 19th century for some spooky goings-on with archive assistant Jo.
The Greville family of Warwick Castle collection is so large and varied in its content that it is difficult to choose just one favourite item. And anybody that works in archives will also tell you that you shouldn't really have favourites. But for the purposes of this video, I have chosen 2 items from the collection. The documents that I've chosen are the séance transcripts. These are relating to a séance which happened at the castle sometime in the latter part of the 19th century. The papers were originally discovered in the collection by researcher and art historian Adam Bushakevich in an envelope marked Clarke's specification for painting. I won't go into too much detail here about the papers, as Adam has written a very detailed article about them, which can be found on the Our Warwickshire website. However, the papers focus on the ghost of an old servant called Edward Jameson, who had been blamed for noises inside the castle and had apparently stolen items from the household and hidden them somewhere in the castle. I find the séance papers interesting, as they are, as far as we are aware, an unusual survival. We haven't come across anything else like this in our collections at the Record Office, and a search on the National Archives Discovery Catalogue shows a similar pattern with other record offices. They are a fascinating insight into a period where there was an increasing interest in the spiritual world, and it also provides an interesting insight into the private lives of the Greville family at the time and their interest in the supernatural.
Next, we have Project Assistant Jack bringing us to the First World War with his favourite document.
I would have to say my favourite document or collection of documents would be the Anthony Eden letters that he sent to his sister during World War I. These give a very interesting and unique look into World War I and a far more personal idea on what it was like during this dark time. And, there's some very interesting documents, particularly this one here, which is a Christmas card he sent during 1918. And it has a lovely depiction, and I'm sorry, I'm going to absolutely butcher this, of Le Cateau-Cabrici, which is a province in France. And it was sent just before the Second Battle, which happened in October, I think. And these also hold a really sort of special place in my heart because it was the first project I ever completed working at the office and really helped get me into sort of working in an archive. And, it's a very fun little collection. There was another one which was a card that was sent from General Pershing, the famous US general, and he was just saying Merry Christmas on the back. I mean, there was quite a few Christmas things in that one. And, it is a very interesting collection from who it's from. Anthony Eden, former Prime Minister, and very important during the war as well, worked a lot with Churchill, and just the Warwick Castle collection as a whole is very interesting with the Edens. Tell me on the spot, what's your favourite collection? It would have to be this.
Next up, we have archivist Joanne talking about her favourite document, a series of sketches from the early 19th century.
I have chosen a collection of sketches, and there's a variety of them, starting with some that look like they've been drawn by a child of, I think, is a bird and a house with a horse in a garden. And then there's quite a few more horses, horse and cart, and a rather interesting one of a rider on a horse who looks like he's part of a hunt and he's just gone over a jump. His face is looking rather scared and worried. And then we go on to some sketches of some buildings, a rather splendid country house, and what looks like a seaside resort, maybe a hotel at a seaside resort. There appears to be the sea on the left of the building, and to the right there's mountains and a garden in the foreground, so it's very detailed. And then with that collection there's also a coloured sketch of Mother Goose, who looks quite scary. She's holding a golden egg and the goose is standing in front of her. And then finally, there's a little diary that details all the journeys that they've made, the dates they left, the dates they arrived at all the different places. And it's covered in a beautiful blue and gold sort of swirly ink pattern on the front cover. And the diary dates from 1816 to 1832. So they are my favourite items out of the collection.
Finally, we have archivist Amanda talking about her favourite document and taking us all the way back to the 15th century.
For a while I've been intrigued by a document that says very little in the scheme of things, and I'm sure it appeals to me because I'm an archivist rather than a historian. But I do like all things medieval. But this document also seems quite shadowy, which allows me to create a murky, though not entirely plausible narrative to go with it. So for now, my favourite document is a letter, which is perhaps a bit of an exaggeration. It's more like an order or a note, written by Richard Neville, but not Kingmaker Richard, rather his father, the Earl of Salisbury. In the note, Neville requests Thomas Hugford and William Barkswell, a local lad perhaps with the name of a parish not far from Warwick, to go to the audit, or maybe pronounced audite, at Warwick and retrieve 2 registers. One of these registers is described as parchment, the other paper, and the paper register is further identified as being a black book containing fees and advisance, and the other the feudary roll of the knight's fees. Nerd alert, I can't tell you how satisfying it is as an archivist to read about records and have a description of them, as well as where they might be. The instructions to the pair don't stop there. Thomas and William are told to place the documents in a canvas bag, which is to be sealed under the seals of the College of Warwick, the Collegiate Church of Warwick St Mary's, and the seal of the Guild of the town, Warwick Guild. Now, is the sealing of a canvas bag for protection from the elements or potential thieves, or perhaps to ensure no one tampers with them? Or, and this is where the narrative gets going, is secrecy required? What I also love about this document is that the pair are ordered to ensure the doors are firmly sealed after they've retrieved the books. They're then to send or bring the bag to London. The document is signed at the bottom by Suffolk, Salisbury and Sudeley, the first two signatures ending with a flourish, which reminds me of simple notary marks. The date is given at London, 21st of October, but no year is written. Now, an earlier catalogue has surmised that the letter dates to somewhere between circa 1445 and 1448, and we know Richard Neville Sr. spent much of his time at his London residence at this time. If Ralph Butler became the 6th Baron Sudeley in 1441, dying in 1473, Neville was the Earl of Salisbury from 1429 to his death in 1460, and I've got the right Earl of Suffolk, William de la Pole, who was Earl of Suffolk from 1415, Duke of Suffolk in 1448, and died in 1450. The letter must then be placed between somewhere 1441 and 1450. But wouldn't a request of this kind only come from a Beauchamp heir if the line was still in existence, which it was until 1449? After June 1449, Anne Beauchamp, daughter of the last male Beauchamp heir, died, and the title then passed to Richard Beauchamp's daughter, another Anne, aunt to the previous Anne, and thereby to her husband, Richard Neville. But why was Richard Neville Sr. requesting these records? I suppose it must be that he's doing it on behalf of his son. Otherwise, how else did he have the authority to request them? Letting my imagination now run away with my murky narrative, would the Nevilles, who we know are power-hungry, be calculating how many nights they could call upon for military service, what the strength was, for how long, and were they also strategizing over advisors which allow for the appointments of loyal followers in places of power and influence, which would therefore forward their cause? There is a faint truth probably to this, but the answer is probably a little more practical. It's more likely that father and son are surveying what Neville Jr. now holds, the economic, political and military gains that the earldom would bring his son, which for any ambitious family was necessary when moving successfully in the world of medieval national politics and local inter-family wars. And I mention inter-family wars because the Nevilles were feuding with the Percys over their northern territories. The 100 Years' War was ongoing, and England was less than 10 years away from tipping into the civil wars of the Roses. So it stands to reason that you need to know what military might you would be able to call upon and what lands you have. A document such as this, seemingly about everyday life, just records and a strong room, what more could an archivist want, is perhaps less interesting to most. But when set in its historical context, maybe it becomes just that little bit more interesting.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Warwick Podcastle. Stay tuned for episode 9 when we'll be hearing from other members of the team here at the County Record Office and featuring even more highlights from the Greville family of Warwick Castle collection.